friends of the International Love Channel. Like every Saturday, our podcast team talk about the uses of international interesting with our guest of honor, Martin Arostegui, a renowned investigative journalist who collaborate with the most important media in the world, such as Voice of America, Wall Street Journal, the Daily Telegraph, the Washington Times, CNN, Fox News, and France 24. Hi, Martin. It is a pleasure to—
Hi, Christian. Good to see you.
It's a pleasure to have our channels with the last events in Ukraine and the threat to axis of evil, the Russia, China, and Iran.
Yes, things do seem to be moving towards a head here, towards some kind of climax. Although I would make some observations about what's happening in Ukraine and to put things a little bit in perspective. Look, I think that's what is quite clear. What the U.S. and Western intelligence services, members of NATO, are pretty much accepted. And I think what Russia has pretty much said their objective is to establish a independent, or well, they would say independent, but an objective view would be a puppet government in eastern Ukraine, controlled by pro-Russian separatists. In other words, a new separate country, carve out a separate country in eastern Ukraine, where there is a significant Russian population, and which fills a gap between Crimea, which was annexed by Russia in 2015, and it was quite a strategic part for Russia, as it's the main Black Sea port, and Belarus in the north, which is another pro-Russian buffer state in Eastern Europe, heavily supported by Russia, the strong pro-Russian dictator Lukashenko, and of course Russia in bordering the largest portion of the frontier to the east. Here they would establish, I suppose, what might be called the independent state of Donbass, which the region is called, and which may well require, if the Russians do move ahead with this, but and every indication seems to be that they will, which may require or may involve a degree of fighting, some bloodshed between pro-Russian separatists and Ukrainian security forces, which can continue to occupy this area because it's considered part of the Ukrainian nationalists consider it to be part of the Ukraine. I think this is what President Biden, in his press conference, and a very criticized remark, but one which I think illustrates pretty much the U.S. acceptance of this, says there will be a minor Russian incursion. I think this is what is absolutely stated. This objective is stated in a resolution passed by the Russian Parliament, or Duma, which is of course a heavily Putin-controlled body, but still gives them some level of legality or formality to the projected Republic of Donbass. And I think it's something that a lot of partners of the US and NATO are pretty ready to accept, to be quite honest. The two major NATO countries, France and Germany, have said very little about what's happening. In fact, Germany, France, what has been the little that President Macron has said, has been more or less supportive of a negotiated solution with Russia. Germany's position is such that I believe it does not approve of any arms transfers to the Ukraine by the German arms or using German territory. And Italy's position is probably the same. So it'll be very difficult for the United States to and the few the only true operational ally I think they have, which is Great Britain, to openly intervene, or at least in any major way, against the Russian move in limited to eastern Ukraine. If it goes beyond that, bets are off. But I would say that's realistically what we can expect. Russia, I think, submitted a list of demands to the United States following a meeting between Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov and U.S. Secretary of State Tony Blinken, in which I think this is the main demand, and obviously it's secret because this is a rather sensitive and an important part of what has to be agreed to if war is to be avoided, direct war. There are other demands like the removal of U.S. troops from other Eastern European countries, Romania and Bulgaria, the Baltic states, I assume, and so on. They're supposed to be included in these demands, and I think that is something the United States nor NATO can possibly agree to, as these are already NATO members. And other demands which may involve the removal or the deployment of certain types of weapon systems in the Eastern in NATO's eastern frontiers, which is Russia. But the main thing is this: they want NATO acceptance of a Russian pro-Russian state being formed in Donbass. That's ultimately what they're after.
What is the real reason for Putin's invading the Ukraine? Why you think? What is the principal reason for this action, for Putin's actions in Ukraine, invading the country, the independent country?
Well, I mean, Ukraine formed part of the original Soviet Union. I mean, it was part of Russia very long, historically been a part of Russia. And it was a very important part of the Soviet Union. I mean, there were major military installations there. Basically, the Black Sea port of Crimea, and where the Russian Black Sea Fleet is based, which is the fleet that projects out into the Mediterranean, and it's considered a strategic part of a strategic component of Russia. They have Crimea. They occupied it in 2015. The West did not intervene. It was a very quick and operation done initially in a covert way, which made it difficult for any kind of reaction. But they have it. Crimea is essentially currently it's exposed. North of Crimea, as I explained in my opening statement, my opening analysis, is still Ukraine, and there are Ukrainian forces can move through there, and therefore Crimea is threatened. So the Russians, they want to close that gap and make Eastern Ukraine, put all of Eastern Ukraine under reliable pro-Russian control. That's essentially as I said, that's an immediate objective. They obviously do not want Ukraine to join NATO. That's, I think, for Russia, that's more the Russian military is consider that to be something of an existential threat. There will be NATO forces, NATO missiles, NATO air bases in Ukraine is something that they cannot accept and cannot contemplate. I'm giving you the Russian point of view. Okay, you may say that it's skewed. You may say that this is not right, that every nation will right to decide its fate, and it's undoubted, and it seems to be, at least that's what the Western media reports, that most Ukrainians favor being part of the European Union and being part of NATO, and they want to be part of Russia. But this is the Russian point of view, that a Western-controlled, NATO-protected Ukraine, or which could form at any moment, could form part of NATO, is something they just simply cannot accept. Keep in mind that it's true of Ukraine that a lot of Russia's gas and oil flows to Europe. The gas pipeline has moved to Ukraine. So it's the idea that somebody could have a hand on that valve outside of the valve could be outside of Russian control is another factor, important economic factor, which may be pushing them towards taking a very militant stand on Ukraine.
What is the Chinese interest in this action, in Russia action to invade Ukraine? China and Iran support Russia action in this move to border, while the real interest in the China and Iran have with Putin's government administration.
Well, I think China, Iran, and Russia are moving closer and closer towards an operation, towards I don't know whether an operational alliance, but certainly a political alliance. Iran already buys a lot of its military hardware from Russia, and even patents certain production of certain Russian weapons, including the AK-47, which are produced in some variety. It uses the Russian SS-300 and SS-400 anti-aircraft system. It's already very much, to some extent, integrated into the Russian defense system to some extent. China, this is interesting because, of course, until now, Russia and China have often been rivals, but that does seem to be changing, at least on paper. Again, we don't know how deep these relationships actually go. I mean, we don't know whether it's really posturing against the U.S. or it's a lot of declarative statements without much substance, but supposedly they've signed a deal to sell Russian oil or Russian gas to China, or they're in the process of negotiating that, which would integrate their energy industry and, of course, give China's energy-hungry economy access to Russian gas. And this could alter the geopolitical situation in Eurasia very, very considerably. They're holding, Russia, China, and Iran are holding a naval exercise, I believe in the Indian Ocean. One is scheduled, I think, for later this month, which is probably the first time all three have actually held a joint military exercise on any major scale. Russia and China have done it individually before, bilateral between the two before. But yeah, things appear to be pointing to a very large Eurasian alliance against the United States and the West. And this would be a major geopolitical shock if it actually ever really if it really ever took off. It could alter the world geopolitical balance if it really took off.
It's possible they invaded Taiwan, China invaded Taiwan?
Well, obviously the Chinese are taking very close note of what the United States does in Ukraine and how it reacts. They're keeping very quiet at the moment. They've expressed some support for the Russian position, but haven't done so in a very definitive way. But yes, obviously they're keeping a very close eye on what happens there and how the United States reacts, all the various nuances. And depending on that, they may decide this is the moment to also to make a move in Taiwan. Again, as I say, Russia's interest in Ukraine is limited. What they're going to do is limited. I think it's going to be limited to the eastern Ukrainian region of Donbass. China's position is vis-a-vis Taiwan is a little bit more, it's less difficult to downscale its demand for Taiwan. Either they move on Taiwan or they don't move on Taiwan. Maybe they can move in on, they can take further moves on neighboring islands, perhaps expand their artificial island chain being formed in the South China Sea, that kind of thing. as to whether a Russian move on Ukraine will immediately, or whether the United States allows or seem to not react sufficiently to a Russian move on eastern Ukraine. It will be enough of a signal for China to go for Taiwan is disputable, but obviously they're looking at this very, very closely.
The Russia interest in Europe for dominating the Ukraine's gas and resource, maybe they begin to a reaction by European Union in the new war, in world international war or world war.
Sorry, Christian, could you repeat that? I didn't exactly understand what you said.
Okay, Russia interested in Europe for the main Ukraine gas. That's the principal reaction to Russia to do resource. Maybe they begin to a reaction in Europe for the new war.
You're talking about what the reaction in Europe would be to a Russian move in Ukraine?
Yeah, it's possible the new war.
Possible a full-scale war, you mean?
Yeah.
Frankly, Christian, it's possible, but I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think Russia wants a full-scale war, and I don't think that the United States, certainly not its NATO partners, can do anything to provoke a full-scale war. I think that if Russia's actions are localized, like I said, to the eastern Ukraine region of Donbass, to establish control there, whether the United States and the NATO allies go as far as recognizing the Russian Republic in Donbass I think is doubtful. I don't think they would go that far. But as I said, I don't think they will react they will make any direct military moves to counteract that. They may reinforce maybe some of the NATO positions in other East European countries. It's possible that other countries that remain neutral, like Finland or Sweden, for example, may feel threatened and decide that they may want to join NATO, and therefore escalate the problem with Russia further, at least at a diplomatic and political level. I think any military reaction would probably be limited to indirect covert support, which is already taking place now. I mean, the United States has a rather large special operations, special forces element already operating in Ukraine, mainly supposedly training Ukrainian forces to mount guerrilla resistance against the Russian invasion. They're moving large quantities of small artillery, of light artillery, anti-tank weapons, handheld anti-tank weapons, shoulder-fired anti-aircraft missiles, like the Stingers or the British Javelin. Sorry, that's an anti-tank. And it's just going to be this kind of thing. They will support I think they will support definitely, indirectly in any case, any Russian move into Ukraine. But I don't think they will intervene directly with, say, aircraft or artillery or let alone troop points. Again, I mean, what strikes me is the lack of support for any NATO stand against Russia from some of the chief European partners. I mean, so far, as far as I know, the only countries that have stepped forward are the British, which are also deploying special operations forces and anti-tank weapons, that kind of thing. There's a lot of deliveries, British deliveries the past week to Kiev. And Spain, actually. Spain has sent a frigate to the Black Sea with one or two support ships. It's offered to send a squadron of Air Force squadron to Bulgaria to beef up NATO's southern flank there, which is its traditional role. That's Spain's assigned role, pretty much in the competition with Russia, NATO role. But yeah, I mean, from what I can see, there's been really very little, certainly from the major Western European countries, there hasn't been much movement or very overt support for the Ukrainian position.
Pro-Russian civil group, who financing this group in Ukraine? Pro-Russian.
Well, Russia.
Russia,
That's quite clear. I don't think they have much support from anywhere else. Russia, obviously, they must finance. They're financing the Russian separatist movement to a very large degree. And Christian, let me. Could you hang on? Could you cut it? I'm going to try to. The lighting is a little bit bad here. There, I think that's better.
Okay.
There was a light there, which I was trying to do for the light. Yes, no, I mean, Russia is obviously supplying the main finance, weapons, and training for the Russian separatists. I'm sure there a lot of the Russian separatist combat units are already probably led by Russian special operations. And there's no question, it's a Russian proxy army, a Russian proxy movement. I don't think anybody can possibly deny that. I mean, even, the United States usually, again, Biden sometimes has these slip-ups. They're quite interesting. He said in his press conference that there's a lot of Russian FSB activity already in Ukraine. FSB being the Russian Secret Service, KGB. And I'm sure they're operating very deeply. I'm sure they're operating in Kiev, and they have all kinds of bases they're activating. And let's say maybe eventually they may even go, if this works, with the annexation of of a pro-Russian eastern state works. They may go eventually, perhaps for the whole 9 yards. They may go for a coup in Kiev and try to change the government there. However, I think they will probably wait a bit before they move that far. They will prod. It's the Russian way of the usual Russian way of acting. They prod. They move slowly and very deliberately. So I don't think they're going to go straight to Kiev, but that could well be an objective if they get away with the land grab and Donbass power grab.
Wow, it's incredible. It's terrible, this news. Really, it's very, very terrible. Now in Europa, now in Ukraine is the Putin's administration is terrible, no? We talk about the Russia and Iran and China interested in this action, doing exercise in the oceans with Marines, Chinese Marines, and that is bad for the war, really. Okay, that is incredible. Thank you so much, Martin. For conclusion, what do you think about the news about the next week, in this next week, doing with the international relation now with the United States?
Well, I think I already told you what I think is going to happen in Russia, but let me expand a bit on this, because I think this will have an effect, I think, on Latin America, on the Western Hemisphere. As you know, Russia has threatened to deploy military deployments into Latin America, into South America, i.e. either Cuba, Venezuela, or Nicaragua.
Nicaragua.
Very Russian flying states. Cuba has been on board well over half a century. They haven't defined what those deployments would be. I mean, they have threatened this. I think if the United States fails to accede to its demand of withdrawing forces from the eastern NATO countries, which was among the list of demands they gave Lincoln, or they gave the U.S. Very possibly that could be their response. But we don't know exactly what the deployment would consist of. But looking ahead, looking forward, I would say there's something they may do is that if the United States supports a guerrilla resistance to Russian occupation of eastern Ukraine, they may well counter with guerrilla activity against the United States and Latin America. That's that's highly possible. As you know, we have Middle Eastern terrorist organizations already operating there. You have Colombian guerrilla organizations, ELN and FARC, which are still, despite the ceasefire, the formal ceasefire negotiated in Colombia, is still very much operational. They're in Venezuela, they're still armed and capable of conducting operations. Maybe they could be financed or trained to conduct some operation in Mexico, maybe across the border now. I've repeatedly said that the United States is now very vulnerable at the southern border, massive 1,000-kilometer border with Mexico, 1,000-mile border with Mexico, as a result of the Biden administration's policy to virtually lift border control, allow mass immigration. So that could well be a response. There could be that could well be a Russian response in Latin America to any U.S. support of guerrilla war against Russian forces in Ukraine.
Wow. Is at the second time of the missile crisis, how doing in 62 years ago, 60 years ago, no? Is that second missile crisis, Russian missile crisis?
The Cuban missile crisis.
Yeah.
You're talking about.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, I think we could easily have that again, except this time, of course, the U.S. position is a lot weaker. In fact, did you see the movie 13 Days about the Cuban Missile Crisis? They made a movie of it. It's very good. There's a point there in which Kennedy tells the Secretary of State that he wants him to organize a unanimous vote in the OAS against the Russian deployment of missiles in Cuba, and just tells them I want it to be unanimous. And I cannot see a president expecting a Secretary of State to do that today. If the Russians were to install, realistically expecting its diplomats to achieve that today, if the Russians were to install any major military installations in Venezuela or Cuba or Nicaragua, it wouldn't happen. There would not be unanimous support for the U.S. position. So basically, if the Russians do move in Latin America today, there would be a situation in which the U.S. diplomatic position is far weaker, and therefore its political position would be much more difficult to support against Russia.
The next question is, what happened with the Russian bases in Venezuela? Have two bases, important military bases in Venezuela. What's going on with these Russian military bases?
Russian military bases in Venezuela?
In Venezuela, have two important.
Christian, I don't know. I'm not sure exactly what you're referring to. I don't think there's been Russian bases in Venezuela to speak of yet. There are Russian bases in Cuba, but not in Venezuela, not yet. There are Russian military installations. There's Russian military hardware in Venezuela, with Russian personnel operating there. We've talked about they've got SS-300 medium-range missile systems, surface-to-air missile systems, batteries, several of them in Venezuela, I think, maybe about half a dozen. There's a lot of Russian military equipment there. I think they're beginning to operate an AK-103 factory, a Kalashnikov rifle factory there. But I don't think there are any Russian bases there, any major installations under direct Russian control. I don't think that exists in Venezuela yet, although maybe it could. Maybe it could as a result of any major if they do decide to deploy. If they go through the threat of deploying military deployments in Latin America to counter U.S. NATO deployments on its border.
That's possible. That is all is possible in this.
Sure, I mean, the infrastructure is there. They've already got the surface-to-air missile systems. They've got a lot of Russian hardware. They've got a lot of Russian trained personnel, and as well as some Russian personnel. And of course, the Cuban connection there that run the government, and they're a major part of the Venezuelan intelligence system. They've both trained and closely aligned with the KGB for decades. So no, I mean, they've got the groundwork to set up a major military installation without a problem. Really probably a U.S. objection, but if the U.S. objects, it's meant to be isolated in Latin America by the rest of the countries which will not object to it, which may be possible at this point. Then I think you have the United States in a very, very tricky situation on that.
Thank you so much, Martin Arostegui. It's a pleasure.
Thank you, Christian.
Really,
pleasure to talk to you.
Very interesting this Ukraine scenario now with Russian administration doing in Ukraine. No? Okay, we see you again next Saturday.
Next Saturday.
Yeah.
See you there, Christian. Look forward to it. Bye.
Thank you so much, Martin Arostegui.